Hey everyone, this is KenendyHawk. The next few Mighty Marvel Minutes segments are going to focus on some key gameplay concepts and some key deck building concepts, and today's video is all about ramp versus burst. Let's begin. Who needs a hand size? One of the biggest complaints about Marvel Champions, certain heroes in Marvel Champions, Hulk, are that they have a really low hand size and they have a really hard time executing the combos built within their hero kit. Each hero kit basically is a 15 card combo that hero is based around, and you're trying to add cards to your deck that add to that combo in some way. There's basically two ways you can try to achieve these combos, but ultimately Champions is a game of combos. You're trying to remove a bunch of threat, deal a bunch of damage, put out a bunch of allies, defend a bunch of attacks, something like that. The two paths you can sort of take are a ramp-like path where you build your board state. You try to get permanence on the board, whether there's supports, upgrades, allies, all sorts of things, until you can execute your combo. And ideally, you want to execute this combo turn after turn after turn after turn. That gets a little bit into deck thinning, which is a future video, not today's point. But ramp is all about getting things on the board, starting slow, and then sort of not bursting, because that's the other name, but doing your thing at the end of the game. The other way you can play Marvel Champions is to burst. You can go through cycles of bursting turns where you all of a sudden deal 15 damage at a turn, and then you have a down turn for a couple turns, and then you do 15 damage in a turn again. This is really interesting because you have to learn how to bide your time in those off turns. You can't deal 15 damage and then sit there in alter ego form until the villain wins. You have to be able to recover, bounce back, and get your combo back into your hand. So ramp versus burst. Again, what is ramp? Ramp is a concept where players will often bring a lot of small upgrades and then medium upgrades and then large upgrades, and it's all going to be about cost curves. A lot of times, ramp players can have more expensive cards in their deck because they're ramping their board state to the point that they can afford those expensive cards. And they're also planning to be sort of a generalist and maintain the board while you're getting to this end game combo. Ramp decks start the game slow. They don't engage the villain right away. They sort of maintain board state until they're able to have this consistently strong turn. Some key cards here might be things like Helicarrier or Avengers Mansion, that once you get them down are going to provide value and improve your board state so you have this end game in mind. Other cards like Mockingbird let you bide that time, so you can throw Mockingbird down, stun the villain, she can block for you again, all while you're building your board state. So you're going to be looking for value cards early on, especially low-cost ones, but then also cards that have a big investment but pay themselves off in the long time are really good in ramp decks. Here's an example of a ramped final form, right? I talk about getting to this final ramped form. It's like a Frieza form. So with 3 cards on the table, that's not that much ramping. Cap can do about 8 damage a round, spending only 1 card from hand, or burning only 1 card from hand. He can attack for 2, trigger Yarnbjorn into Super Soldier Serum, and then he could discard a card, ready himself, attack for 2 again, trigger Yarnbjorn again. 8 damage for 1 resource is a really good consistent damage, but you've got to maintain time until you get these 3 cards in hand. Yarnbjorn's unique, Super Soldier Serum is only a 2 of, so it's going to take a while. You have to get them all on the table, which is a 5 resource investment, and then you have to spend 1 resource a turn. So it takes you a while to ramp to this sort of combo that you're going to put off. So now let's talk about bursting and see how that differs. Bursting is a lot more volatile in nature. It's going to sort of explode on any given turn, whether you're removing a bunch of threat and then playing Turn of the Tide 4 times as Miss Marvel, or you're attacking with Mean Swing and Guild Strike and combat training and all these other things. You're going to have these really explosive bursty turns. It's more than just drawing the right cards at the right time. It's building your deck to enable these explosive combos. When you're building a burst deck, every card you put in your deck really needs to be judiciously thought about to decide, does this add to my combo? If I draw this, is it always going to be a resource if it's my combo turn, or does it enable my combo further if I do something fancy with it? Some typical cards might be something like Nick Fury, where you play him, you draw 3 cards, you do this big burst. Skilled Strike, right? If you have a base attack of 3 or 4 or 5, depending on what upgrades you have in play, Skilled Strike can be a card that for 1 resource you perform an attack and you do 8 damage or something like that. I find cards like Assess the Situation to be another card that can be very bursty, right? You are giving up 1 resource this turn for a resource next turn. So if you have a 5-card hand size, well, now you've put yourself down to a 4-card hand size on turn A, but on turn B, you're going to have a 6-card hand size, and there's a big difference between having 5 cards in your hand and having 6 cards in your hand. So this is just one way to do sort of a bursty technique. So here's an example of a burst. So now this is the first turn. You're playing as Hawkeye. You're going to get your bow in your hand from your alter ego ability. And with just 2 cards in hand, Skilled Strike and Mean Swing, you can do a swing for 8. Turn 1. You don't need to wait to draw 2 Super Soldier Serums. You don't need to wait to draw Yarnbjorn, but you can burst for 8 from the first turn of the game. This is going to be a lot less consistent because you're not going to draw into Skilled Strike and Mean Swing every time you shuffle your deck. You're not going to draw them every round like you would with the Yarnbjorn Super Soldier Serum setup. But it's still a very viable way to deal damage. So there's this concept of like ramping up to a consistent board state that happens frequently, or bursting frequently depending on the draw of your deck and the way you set your deck up. So which one of these is better? I've seen a lot of people say that burst is sort of this aggro thing that's just variable that you can't really wrap your head around, or that ramp is too slow to take on the Galaxy's most wanted villains. And the answer is neither of these is better. Both can be played in Marvel Champions. Both can be played with all heroes and almost at all difficulty levels. Some heroes are going to lend themselves to ramp very well, like Captain America with his resource generators and his consistent damage output and his ability to maintain the board while you're waiting till your combo is ready. And some are going to be more bursty in nature. These are the characters that have 3 attack or 3 thwarts or have really explosive cards within their deck. Bursty characters are going to have to take advantage when they have an opening to swing into, and ramping characters can sort of bide their time and wait for that opening. And there's just this ebb and flow in the concept of not just how you play the game, but how you build your deck to do that. When building a deck, you should consider if you want to plan a ramp to your final form or plan mitigations while you're waiting for these bursty turns. It's very important while considering how you build your deck, how you're going to accommodate for this weakness, because each of these play forms has a weakness. One of them plays the long game, one of them can play a very quick game, but it has to be able to survive and pivot if it cannot. Can you have both? Of course you can. There's a lot of ways you can build decks that have both of these concepts, so don't feel like you have to pick one path and you shall stay on your path. These things can intermingle left and right. One example is in a leadership deck, right? We all know the leadership deck that gets 5 allies on the board, it spams strength and numbers, it plays Avengers Assemble, and then it wins the game. That's such a ramp move, right? You need to get 5 allies out, which means you need Triskelion, you need Stinger, you need Avengers Tower, you need to get a bunch of honorary Avengers out, then you have to get 4 resources in your hand, have everybody strengthen numbers, draw into the right card, play it, and then burst to win the game. Very rampy. It's going to take you a while to get set up. At the same time, you can include cards in that deck that allow you to burst. A card like Goliath, right, can jump up to 5 attack, get ready, and just slam face for 10 in one turn. That's a very bursty turn. So there's ways to combine burst and ramp. Avengers, Earth's Mightiest Heroes is another very bursty card, but it can also play into your end game ramp when you try to win the game. So just some considerations when you're considering burst versus ramp. If you're going to ramp, ask yourself these questions when you're building your deck. How will I maintain the board while I'm setting up to my ramped final form? Do I need to flip to get there? And what mitigations do I need to bring to avoid the pitfalls of flipping? And what other pitfalls can happen? If I draw caught off guard and discard something, is that going to completely set my ramp back to the point that it's unsustainably long game? If you're going to burst, here's some other questions you should ask yourself. What do you do about dead off turns? If you're counting on drawing Skilled Strike and Mean Swing every round, you're going to have rounds where you draw nothing to do. What can you build in your deck? What can you place in your deck that supports your bursty turns on these off turns? What can disrupt your burst? If you get stunned or confused, do you have ways to remove those status conditions so that you can still perform your burst when it appears in your hand? Because nothing is more worse for a burst player than when you draw all your combo pieces in your hand and then you realize, crud, I can't Hulk Smash because I'm stunned. So think about that. And can you pivot if needed? The ultimate question here, right, is when you're playing ramp is you're planning to play a long game, so you build that into your deck. When you're playing burst, a lot of times you don't plan that long game into your deck, but there's going to be cases where you need to pivot. All of a sudden, you're 3 damage short and you have to survive a round. Can you do it? What can you put in your deck to make sure it happens? Thank you for joining me for this Mighty Marvel Minute.